Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Just give everyone a few minutes to join before we cover Hadith number 3. If you're on Instagram, then you can follow along with us. If you'd like to see the Hadith, I'm going to put it up on Facebook. So I'll put it up right now on Facebook. So if you want to follow along, you can go to Facebook, or I think also Periscope or Twitter. They also have the slide up as well. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. I hope inshallah everyone's doing well. Welcome back to our Wednesday weekly Women's Study Circle. This week I'll be teaching inshallah. You have the unfortunate reality of me teaching instead of Ustad Fatima. We're going through the Arba'in of Imam Nawawi. Arba'in is a collection of 40 hadith. It's when a scholar collects 40 hadith. And oftentimes scholars did this for different reasons. They would collect 40 hadith as a compilation. The way that you can think about it is like if a person were to put together a playlist, you know, what's their favorite, or like a top 10, right? And so some scholars would put together different compilations of hadith sometimes in order to address certain topics, so you can find them like thematically. Arba'in on certain topic this, or Arba'in on the virtues of Quran, or Arba'in on the virtues of marriage, or so there's different Arba'in on different topics. Imam Nawawi's Arba'in, his collection of 40 hadith, are on like the foundations of religion. These are the different ahadith that cover different foundations of religious belief that Imam Nawawi, who was a great scholar, may Allah have mercy upon him, that he believed, and he wanted to put forth the idea that if a person could understand these 40 hadith, okay, if a person could understand this compilation, this Arba'in, then they would be able to grasp like really the strong foundations of their religion. And it would give them a great, platform for their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to move forward on. So today's hadith is number 3, Hadith al-Thalith. And this hadith, if you look at the notes, this hadith, we've called it what Islam is built on. What Islam is built on. And the reason why we called it that is because the verb that the Prophet Muhammad uses in this hadith is actually a verb that talks about the construction of something. That the verb is discussing or is placing Islam almost like a building. And the Prophet would do this a lot. He would use metaphor, or he would use figurative language or imagery to try to describe something. There was a time where he was sitting with his companions and he drew a straight line in the sand. Straight line. And then from that straight line, the hadith says that he drew different branches coming off of it, okay? And he explained that this image that he just constructed, he said this straight line is the straight path. This straight line is the path to Allah, the path to paradise, the straight path, right? And he said, and these diversions from this straight path are the diversions off of the straight path, right, towards disobedience, towards negligence of Allah. And he said at the beginning of each of these trails of the straight path, he said that there's a shaitan, there's a devil that's calling out to you. Okay, so there's only one straight path, and then there's numerous diversions. And as a person's walking along the straight path, there's a shaitan that's calling out to them, saying, come this way, come this way, come this way, calling to them. So the Prophet ﷺ, in his teaching and the way that he instructed and educated, he would oftentimes use this kind of figurative imagery in order to communicate the point that he wanted to communicate. So for today's hadith, the image that he's presenting to us is the image of a structure or a building. And he's teaching us that this building, like any building, has supports. And if a building does not have adequate support, it is not a building that can be relied upon. It's not a building that can be safely inhabited. That's why with cities, like if the city comes and looks at a building that doesn't look like it has a good foundation, they'll condemn the building. They'll say that, no, this building is not adequate. This building is not safe, right? It's condemned until, someone can come in and renovate it and fix the foundation so that it's safe to inhabit. So the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith is giving us the idea or the analogy of a building so that we are aware that what he's describing has support and it has certain structural protocol that has to be there. So what's the hadith? Let's read it. Bismillah. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He says, بني الإسلام على خمس. He said, Islam is built on 5 things. Islam is built on 5 things. That the construction, right? The structure, if we were to see Islam as like a building, that it's standing upon 5 pillars, okay? Or, some scholars in the commentary, they said it has 5 walls. 5 pillars or 5 walls. What are these 5 things? Number 1, shahadati an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. The first one is believing and testifying, witnessing, shahadati. It's not just the idea of saying it, but there's a process of testification. There's nothing that is worthy of worship, the worship of human beings besides God. That nothing else deserves that level of worship and devotion besides Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is God's servant and his messenger. That's the first pillar of this building, right? So we have 5 pillars now. The second, and we're going to go through each one inshallah, but I just want to finish the hadith. Wa iqamis salati, and to establish the prayer. Not about performing the prayer, but establishing it. Iqami, okay? Wa ita'i az-zakati, and to give zakat, the annual charity. Wa hajj al-bayt, wa sawmi Ramadan, and to make pilgrimage to the house, the Kaaba, and to fast the month of Ramadan. That the Prophet ﷺ said that these are the 5 things that Islam is built upon. All right, so what is some of the commentary of this hadith, and what are some of the implications and the lessons that we can take from this hadith? Number 1, just from the verb itself, bunya, to be something to be built on something else, or to be constructed, that we see that Islam is something that is constructed. Okay, and this has a couple different meanings for us. Number 1 is that if we want our Islam to be strong, we have to look at our foundations. We have to look at what the strength of the foundation is. The building is only as strong as the strength of the foundations of that building. Too often, and you see this, by the way, a lot with different, every different realm, too often people are very, very concerned. All of us, when I say people, I include myself, by the way, we're very, very concerned with the manifestations and the design and the decoration of something, right? So we love to see like beautiful interior design. We love to see really, really nice decoration. We love to see good furnishing. Someone, mashallah, they have good taste in furniture and they have good taste in different things like that. But rarely does a person have the insight to be able to appreciate the construction quality of something, the quality of something. And in fact, when you purchase a home, when you buy a house, it's part of good practice for somebody when they purchase a house that they actually hire somebody, an inspector, to come by and to make sure that the foundation of the home, that there's no signs of cracking in the foundation, right? Because it doesn't matter how nice your house is, it doesn't matter how expensive your furniture is or all the things that are inside of your house. The minute you start to see signs of a bad foundation, like doors not closing and windows not opening and movement and things like that, it doesn't matter how nice everything is. Honestly, that house is not good. That house is crumbling. Okay, that house is moving, and that's not a good sign. So the Prophet ﷺ here is teaching us that Islam has many, many things. Islam has a lot of things, and there's a lot of things here that he didn't mention. In fact, one of the commentators, he brought up like a list of things that we consider to be part of Islam, very serious things, right? Learning Quran. He didn't mention that Islam is built upon memorizing Quran, learning Quran, tafsir. He didn't mention, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Islam is built upon, being good to one's parents. He didn't mention that Islam is built upon. There are some things that he didn't mention, but we know that they're part of Islam because they're mentioned numerous times in the Quran and Hadith, etc. But what does that mean? Does that mean that we just ignore those things? No. What it means is that when it comes to building a good relationship with Allah, there is always the concept of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. There's prioritization, right? That a person spiritually has to know, like, okay, I have to focus on this. Once I'm done with this, then I can move on to that. It doesn't mean that the second thing that a person is focusing on is pointless. No. What it means is that if I don't make sure that my first level is taken care of, then my second level might not be as good as it could be, right? If I don't make sure that my foundation is strong, then my what I'm focusing on next may not be as good as it is. So the Prophet ﷺ says, "Bunya al-Islamu ala khamsin," that these 5 things are a construction, and in order for you to feel, and not just once and for all, by the way. A lot of times when life starts getting hectic, when things start getting crazy for us, when we're not sure, when there's a lot of anxiety or a lot of stress in our life, one of the things that my teachers would always recommend to me is like, go back to your core relationship pillars with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Go back to those things. Go back to those 5 pillars and ask yourself, like, how good is the quality with my basics? They say go back to basics, right? So, Bunya al-Islamu ala khams. What are these 5 things? The first that we mentioned, shahadati an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. That he says that the first is that you have to be able to witness and testify and believe with conviction. And this actually is interesting because a lot of times when we talk about the 5 pillars, the shahada is kind of seen as like a one-time thing, right? We look at it like, oh, okay, as long as the person is Muslim. So if a person is, accepting of this fact, or they're born into Islam, or they, convert to Islam, that's it. They've done it. They've done it once, and that's it. But actually, when I was reading some of the commentary on this hadith, they said that this is this pillar is probably the most difficult pillar. When you look at all of them, prayer, fasting, hajj, charity. People have in their own head what is the most difficult. For some people, the idea of prayer 5 times a day is very challenging. For some people, fasting is the most difficult. For some people, giving up their wealth is difficult. For some people, making hajj is like something they can't even imagine. But some of the scholars, they said this one is actually the most challenging because this one is the one that is it's a requirement of consciousness. Shahada is not just a moment in time. It's not just like a one-time event. This is almost like Allah Ta'ala, this is our recognition of this statement in every moment that we're breathing. It's almost like the shahada is a requirement for every breath, not verbally, but internally. Like, am I living my life as a witness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one worthy of worship, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his messenger? Like, am I living my life in this way? And if I'm not living my life in this way, then my first wall or pillar that this building is built upon might be a little bit deficient. Now, we don't say that the whole thing is ruined. No, we just say it needs a little bit of work, right? It needs a little bit of work. So obviously the idea of shahada is something that we think of verbally, but there are many ways that we can interpret this and think about this as being more of like a state of being, right? This is, am I treating people in the Quranic ethic? Do I have Quranic etiquette when I talk to people, right? Am I speaking to people well? Am I treating them well? When people see me, right? When people have an interaction with me, an engagement with me, are they reminded of the beautiful nature of Islam, or are they reminded of something else, right? Do they think of Allah and His Messenger, or do they think of something else? And the Prophet ﷺ, he used this litmus test for the believers to be able to understand the quality of someone's character, right? He told other companions that if you want to know, the quality of a good friend is that they remind you of Allah. That when you see them, you're reminded of Allah, right? And so this is like a good rubric for us. That if I want to know if I'm truly living this shahada, one question I have to ask myself is like, when I interact with my family, right? When I interact with my spouse, my parents, my kids, my friends, like, are they reminded of Islam? Are they reminded of the beauty of Islam? Or are they reminded of the deficiency of me, my humanity? Right? Because we all have weaknesses, we all have deficiencies, but if we act in a way that is true to the shahada, if we act in a way that truly shows that we believe that Allah is the only thing worthy of worship, we're devoting ourselves to Him more than anything else, more than what I want, more than what they want, more than what anyone wants. I'm devoting myself to Allah. and I'm devoting myself to the lifestyle of the Prophet Muhammad to be like him. If people can see that in me, then that's a testimony, that's a testification that you are living this shahada. It's no longer just a verbal statement, right? It should be a verbal statement, but now it's also action as well. So that's the first pillar that Islam is built upon. The second, what iqam as-salat, to establish the prayer. And this is like one of my favorite little Quranic and Hadith, language, vocabulary things, is that the word iqama, to establish something, it has a connotation of something being firmly set, that this thing is not something that can ever be moved. And when you look at the people who have strong faith, historically throughout time, right? Prayer is the one universal that, despite personality, despite region, despite era, whatever time a person lived in, prayer is the thing that developed that strong anchor for that person. Prayer is that thing. And many of us, there's always like the joking but true stories of like the elders in our lives, that if you look at like, your grandparents, my mom, I always jokingly tell people like the stories about my mom and how my mom has like a prayer section in our home where she has her prayer rug, and she bought like a music stand, not for music, she bought it for her mushaf. She has like a big Quran, like a big copy of the Quran, one of those large ones with large print, and she leaves it there, and this is where she makes her qiyam, this is where she prays, right? And she's able to read from the Quran there as well. During her qiyam, she opens the Quran, she reads from it, and that becomes like an anchor. And my mom has been through a lot. When I look at the strength that my mother has, you look at the strength of certain people in your life, they've been through a lot. It's almost like you imagine a storm crashing down upon them. The reason why we feel safe in this house is because, during storms and hail and wind and rain and all of that, we feel safe because we know that inshallah, that the walls are built well, that there's certain code that this country, this city has, that we have to feel like, okay, I'm safe. I don't think that this wind is going to blow my house down. And part of that, when it comes to a person's faith, not being blown down by the winds of life, is that a person has strong prayer. That it's iqam as-salat, and their prayer is established. Aqimu as-salat, establish the prayer, it's established. So when you look at a room and you see many, many things in that room that are movable, but then you look at the walls. And even those walls, there are walls that are, walls, and then there are those that are load-bearing walls that the construction company or whoever, they'll tell you, we can't move these walls. Like, these are load-bearing walls. This is the wall that is carrying the weight of the house is on this wall, right? That's salah. That's prayer for the believer. That when a believer wants to make sure that their iman is strong, like a well-built home, that they make sure that their prayer is a load-bearing wall, that it's carrying the weight of them. And this is why when the Prophet ﷺ, whenever something difficult hit his life, he would go to prayer. He would rush to prayer. When the adhan was called, he would feel relieved. When the iqamah was given, he would feel at rest. Because the prayer was the place where the Prophet ﷺ went, and where he ﷺ was able to reconnect and rejuvenate and refresh. Right? Arihna biha ya Bilal. That's what he would say to Bilal. Call the prayer, but he would say, give us rest with it. When you call the adhan, give us rest, please, with it. Like, let us have some rest. Right? So the question that I have for myself, number one, with this hadith, am I living my life in a way that is reminding people of Allah and His Messenger? When people see me, are they reminded of the goodness of Islam? Number two, is prayer something that is a firm pillar in my life? Is it established to the point where nothing moves it? And you can look at it, it's a very easy litmus test for us. The question we ask ourselves is, am I scheduling my prayer around things? Like for my dhuhr, is it moving around every single day? Some days it's at 1:30, some days it's at 1:45, some days it's at 3, some days it's at 4:45, some days it's at 5, right? Asr doesn't come in here till later. Some days it's like right before Asr. If that's the case for my prayer, then maybe, not for sure, but maybe it's an indication that my salah is not as firmly established as it should be. That I have other things that get in the way. Everybody has realities, everybody has errands and work and family, everybody has that. I'm not saying that a person should feel guilty if they're, as long as you pray it in the time, then that's what Allah Ta'ala is asking of you. But remember, the more dedication and commitment we have to making this something that's in movable, right? The more that that becomes a routine. If something matters, we make it routine. The more that that becomes a routine, the more reliable we're going to find our faith in moments of difficulty. The more we're going to be able to rush back to Islam and Iman as a shelter for us in moments of difficulty. Wa'ita is zakat. And the next pillar, the giving of charity of zakat. This is something that if somebody wants their Islam to be strong, part of that is they have to give zakat. Okay, and there's two things that we're mentioning. There's a lot of things that can be mentioned about this, but there's two that I want to mention today from the commentaries that we read. And that is, number one, that Islam is not a religion of individualism. Islam is not a religion of isolationism or individualism. Islam is a religion that believes that part and parcel of this building is that you have mechanisms to take care of other people. That isn't it beautiful that the zakat, which literally is built around the idea of taking care of somebody, is part of this religion, that it's not extra credit. Zakat is not something that is supererogatory. It's an obligation. It's obligatory. So in this hadith, we learn that this building is built upon these five things. One of those things, 20%, one of those things is to be conscious and aware of those around you who you can help, who Allah has given you the means to help them, that you need to help them. There's no such thing as like doing it on your own. This hyper-individualism that many of us, especially in Western secular societies, the hyper-individualism that many of us, we fail to even realize. We fail to even realize how hyper-individual we are because we were just steeped in it. You know how you steep a tea bag or coffee, you just like soak it in it? We're like soaked in this hyper-individualism. So it's like very difficult. One person told me, he goes, don't you think it's so weird how every home in a neighborhood, every home in a neighborhood has its own lawnmower? He said, don't you think that's weird? And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, does everybody use their lawnmower on the same day at the same time? And I said, no, you're right. And he goes, wouldn't it make sense for like one or two or three or four homes to like all buy one lawnmower and just share it to cut their grass? And they could take turns, one person on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. I said, yeah, that would make a lot of sense. You have each person buying a lawnmower for $300, $400 when they all could chip in and just share it, right? And again, it's a silly example, but it really actually speaks to something that sometimes we frame our existence so individually that we forget about the communal responsibility that we have. And if you look, that's why in Islam, there are rights that the community has upon people, okay? There are rights that are communal obligations. If you look in fiqh, there are individual obligations that every person has to take care of. And then there are communal obligations that the community, a few people have to step up in order to take care of everybody. Right? Fardun kifaya. That if a group of people are able to do this, then it's important that those people do that. And what that does is it makes sure that it maintains the good standing of the entire community. So zakat, number one, is that Islam is built upon, one of the things that Islam is built upon is the idea of taking care of people. The idea of taking care of people financially, making sure that they have bread, making sure that they have a home, making sure that they have water, making sure that they have school supplies, making sure that they have new clothes, right? Zakat is an important element. And if you want to get a better feel of zakat, my recommendation to everybody is to not just try to be like a digital zakat giver. Of course, like we said, just like the person who prays their salah anytime within the frame, anytime within the window, of course, it's accepted, inshallah. But if a person really wants to excel in this pillar of their religion, it's not just about praying in any time, it's about praying it and making it a pillar. It's the same with zakat. Don't just become a victim of the digital zakat giving, which we all do easily, unfortunately, but rather try to become involved in efforts of distribution. Okay? Not to make you feel good about it, but to show you the value of this pillar in the religion. Right? Try to see. There are so many different examples, man, but the distribution of wealth, being able to take wealth and go and make sure that families have rice and vegetables and meat, and to make sure that they have school supplies for their kids and new clothes and shoes, and like to be a part of that distribution where it's not about you, it's about them. and you're just the person delivering it to them, it shows you the value of this pillar in our religion. The next, وَحَجْ الْبَيْتِ, وَحَجْ الْبَيْتِ, to make the pilgrimage to the house. Okay, so this is number 4, to make the pilgrimage to the house. That when a person is able to sacrifice, and this is, Hajj is one of those things, subhanAllah, that like really it's from a, oh sorry, I forgot to mention the second thing about zakat. The first thing is obviously the taking care of others, but the second thing, and this ties in directly to Hajj, is the idea of sacrificing your wealth. That the acquisition of wealth, the hyper-capitalist society that we live in, the focus on acquiring more and more and more without a counter focus on giving away, on sacrifice, is a very dangerous, hyper-toxic environment to live in. That, I want something, and if I want it, I'm going to get it, and I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to dedicate my time. And the acquisition of wealth can be something that can ruin someone's faith totally. The focus on wealth can be something that can ruin somebody's faith totally. The Prophet ﷺ said numerous narrations that talk about this. One of them that comes to mind is when the Prophet ﷺ, he said that he fears, when he was speaking to his companions, he said, I don't fear that you're going to go back to shirk. I don't fear that Muslims are one day going to go back and start worshiping idols. And he said, my fear for the believers is what he called al-wahn. Al-wahn. And the companion said, what's wahn? What's al-wahn? And he said, love of this world and fear of death. He said, my fear for the Muslims is not that they're going to go back to worshiping idols and bowing towards stones and those things. He said, my fear for Muslims is that they're going to fall so in love with this dunya that they're going to think that this is permanent. They're going to think that acquiring more is what gives them happiness, not the remembrance of Allah. They're going to think that getting something new is the whole goal of this life, not the worship of Allah. And as a result of that love of dunya, they're going to have fear of death, that they're going to irrationally fear death. Death is something to be feared. Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, she goes, Ya Rasulullah, like, is it a bad sign that we don't like to die? Right? Meaning, like, it's normal. People, obviously, no one likes to be separated from their loved ones. No one likes the idea of being able to have good moments with their family and their kids and their friends and enjoying the blessings of Allah. No one sits there and says, yes, death. Like, people, of course, it's one of the things that is very heavy to think about, to reflect about. But the reason why a person maybe might fear it, the reason not being a natural reason, but being connected to their love of this world and the love of material acquisition, that's a problematic fear. That I want more. If I die, then how am I going to get more? Well, the reality is it's temporary anyways. So zakat is something that breaks that chain. Hajj is this incredible experience that really, make dua. Right now, everybody raise your hands and make dua. Oh, Allah, open the doors of safety for us to make pilgrimage to your house. I mean, because Hajj is something that's amazing. It's amazing. Hajj is like a total Islamic experience in a matter of days, where you experience like devotion to Allah, sacrifice for Allah, patience and persistence in the face of difficulty, being charitable. All of these different aspects of Hajj, subhanAllah, they come together. But Hajj, if I were to characterize it in one word for somebody, it is sheer and utter devotion for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That when you're on Hajj, man, nobody knows who you are. Nobody cares who you are. Like, everybody is there for themselves. It's the scholars have described it as the dress rehearsal for the Day of Judgment. That you go there and everybody is just focused on getting closer to Allah. It's not that people are rude. When I say nobody cares who you are, it's not that people are rude to you, but like when you walk around and like somebody, somebody accidentally bumps into you, you're kind of like, watch where you're walking, right? There, it's like, look, man, I'm here for the Kaaba. I'm not here for you. If I bumped into you, I'm sorry, but like, I'm here for the Kaaba. And so you get like, mashallah, the 4'10" Malaysian aunties like pushing me over, and I'm a big guy, right? And they like push because they're there for Allah. And it reminds everybody, like, you think you're a big deal? You think that you're like, somebody who's really valuable, and man, you have this degree and this car, and do you guys know what my investments are, and blah, 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 blah. Listen, 4'10" Malaysian auntie, and the group, like the 9,000 of them making tawaf at once, they don't care who you are. Like all they care about is Allah. Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. That's why they're there. No one is there for you. No one is, and you are not even there for you in that way. You're there for Allah, right? You're there obviously for your relationship with Allah, but you're not there for any other reason besides Allah. So Hajj is one of those amazing experiences that, and this is why I recommend to everybody, try to plan to go when you're young. Go when you're on the younger side of your life. I know that culturally people tend to, say that I'll go later. And historically there was a reason for this, because people would save up wealth their entire life and then go. Okay, so there might be a reason they needed that time, but try to save up and go when you're on the younger side of your life. I was once doing Hajj one year with an elderly woman, and she was crying when she finished Hajj, and I remember asking her, everyone cries when you finish, right? It's a very emotional experience, very overwhelming. So I saw her, she was very, very moved, and she was, crying profusely, and I went to her and I said, Auntie, like, Allah Ta'ala, he loves you so much. Look, he brought you here. And, I was trying to give her some like positive vibes, because I didn't want her to be too down. Sometimes when you finish Hajj, you can kind of feel very emotional. And so I gave her some positive thoughts, and she said to me, she goes, no, I feel so blessed to be here. I'm so thankful to Allah to be here. She goes, my only regret in life is that I didn't go earlier. She said that I know the kind of person I feel like I am now. After doing Hajj, I know who I want to be now. Like, I want to be different, right? That's why they give you a title. When you come back, you're al-Hajj. You're the one who's done Hajj. And she said to me, she goes, I wish I did this when I was younger so that I could have changed earlier. I could have been different earlier. I could have been a different person earlier on in my life. And so that's something that I recommend. And then the last one is Wasawmi Ramadan, to fast the month of Ramadan. We just completed Ramadan a couple months back. May Allah Ta'ala, give us another one. May He accept this Ramadan and give us another one. I don't need to spend too much time talking about the virtues of Ramadan, because this is something that everybody lives and loves and experiences themselves. But this is 1 month of the year is a pillar of a person's entire faith. 1 month is a pillar of a person's entire faith. If that is not a good enough reason for us to reconsider how we live that month, and this Ramadan, the Ramadan of 2020, which I think will go down in history for everybody as being one of the most unique Ramadan experiences, where the masajid were not, most of the masajid in the world, if not in the States, if not the world, were not open. And they maybe weren't open in the way that we're used to them. So we missed out on the congregational Tarawih prayer in the way that we were used to. We missed out on a lot of the community aspects. But interestingly, and it was difficult. There's no doubt. It was difficult. The community aspect is a big reason why Ramadan is so special for us. But one of the things that I heard from many people is, despite the difficulties, they said that there were moments of this Ramadan where they truly felt things in their faith that they didn't feel elsewhere, that they didn't feel in previous years. And so this Ramadan maybe has allowed us to it gave us a glimpse of rethinking what the focus of our Ramadan should be, and how if we focus a lot on socializing and eating together and having iftars, then alhamdulillah, Allah will accept that from us. But maybe this Ramadan gave us the opportunity to focus a little bit more on self-rectification, some Quran recitation, developing ourselves. And in that, we found a special moment, a special secret. Like, oh man, this is kind of a good schedule for me to have. This is a good way for me to live my Ramadan. So this 1 month, remember that in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is saying that Islam, a person's entire faith, is built upon these 5 things. And one of those 5 is Ramadan. Okay, is Ramadan. The last thing that I'll leave you with for today is the idea of how totally encompassing Islam is when a person looks at these 5 pillars, and how absolutely the 5 pillars of Islam are engaging every aspect of a person's life. They're engaging their life goals, right? Hajj. They're engaging their annual goals, Ramadan and Zakat. You have to give Zakat in Ramadan. You have to give Zakat every year, and you have to do Ramadan every year. They're engaging their daily routine, the daily schedule that a person has, okay, which is salah. And then it's giving a person a sense of purpose every moment, which is shahada. That these 5 pillars, they're not just like this ritual sense of 5 pillars. They are a way for a person to recalibrate themselves. And the Prophet ﷺ is telling this hadith not just to the people who are not Muslim yet to show them what Islam is built on. He's reminding Muslims what Islam is built on. Many of us read this hadith and we're like, yeah, I know that. It's not about knowing it. The Prophet ﷺ is teaching this hadith to Sahaba, to companions, who know the religion better than you and I do. He's teaching this to them to show them what? That just like you have to make sure that the foundation of your home is good, you also have to constantly evaluate and assess and check back and make sure that the foundation of your faith is good. If you feel like your faith is wavering or shaking in a certain way because of many things that this world puts you through, which is absolutely, no one is denying that. This world has a lot of chaos. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. Allah Ta'ala described human beings as being inside of toil and turmoil and work. That this world has a lot of chaos, has a lot of difficulty. Allah Ta'ala talks about this. He says that one of the purposes of this life is that you're going to be tested. There's a lot of tests. But if a person wants to be able to maintain their faith throughout tests, it would be best for them to go back and to make sure that the strength of their 5 pillars is sufficient, is taken care of. Starting with their moment, their every moment of witnessing that Allah Ta'ala is their Lord, being thankful to Allah every moment, trying their best to remember Allah every moment, and then next going to prayer, and then making sure that they are charitable, thinking about dedicating for Hajj and also for Ramadan, having those lessons and those moments, living their everyday life. We'll inshallah conclude here. This hadith, we can go on and on. We could have gone really in depth in a lot of ways, but we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people who are pillars. The foundations of our faith are strong, so that whenever the waves come crashing down on us of the dunya, that we are able to remind ourselves of the akhirah, and all of these things will give us that strength to do so, inshallah. I pray that everybody, inshallah, is doing well and staying safe and staying healthy. Make sure that you have a self-care regimen. Make sure that you take care of yourself physically, emotionally, and also spiritually during this time of unprecedented change and difficulty. Make sure that you take care of yourself, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum, everybody. Take care. I'll see you guys tomorrow, inshallah. At 5 p.m., we have the next section of our Perfecting the Prayer series with Imam Hazari's book on prayer. Barakallahu feekum. Love you all for the sake of Allah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.